Scott Fromey, and welcome to the Backwoodsman Institute. Well, in these next set of videos I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about traditional archery. Now I'm going to be talking about traditional archery in the aspects of the basics of traditional archery. So these videos are kind of going to be geared to the individual who is just wanting to get into archery and is trying to decide whether to go with a compound or go with traditional archery, or you're a compound shooter and are wanting to go into traditional archery. It seems to me every year there's individuals that know that I'm shoot traditional archery, and so they start quizzing me. They come to find out that they're a compound shooter and they're wanting to get into traditional archery and just don't know quite really where to start at. So these videos kind of geared to you guys. So there's really maybe three aspects of traditional archery. You have the bow, you have the arrow, and you have your shooting technique. So let's go ahead and get started with talking about the bow. There are two basic bow designs in traditional archery, and really it's what the limbs are. There's the longbow, which is just a regular straight limbed bow, and then there's the recurve, which, as you can see, has a curved limb to it. Here is an example of a longbow. Now this is this one is a wood bow with actually another piece of wood laminated on top of it. And you have your limbs, you got your handle. This here is the back of the bow. On the inside is the belly of the bow. This bow itself would probably fall in the category of primitive archery. In the realm of traditional archery, one aspect of that is called primitive archery. For instructional purposes, I'm just going to be talking about the modern traditional archery, and we may get into the primitive aspect of it on another set of videos. Like I said, I want this one just to talk about the basics of traditional archery. This is an example of a modern longbow, and it's made out of wood laminated with fiberglass. So like I said, there's two different types. There's the longbow and the recurve. Now how do they differ? What kind of characteristics does each one have? Well, the best way I can describe it is if you would take a baseball and lock your wrist so it can't bend and throw that ball, that would be kind of like what a longbow would be like. Shooting a recurve is kind of like throwing a ball with being able to bend your wrist. So when you're cocked back and you're throwing the ball, at the last part of release, you're kind of whipping the ball with your wrist. It's kind of what a recurve does. It puts a little bit of whip to the transfer to the arrow, so it spits the arrow out a little faster. Some longbows have a tendency to vibrate, which can be unpleasant. I've shot some longbows that just like almost bites or puts a shock to it, and you end up with more like a vibration in your arm. That's what they call a hand shock when they're talking about shooting traditional archery. It's typical to a lot of longbows. They transfer that vibration almost like a little bit of what they call a hand shock. What I'm telling you is a recurve makes for a lot smoother shooting bow than a longbow. Does that matter? It's personal preference. Like I said, if I was a compound shooter and going into traditional archery, and I picked up a longbow and all of a sudden I felt that little bit of a hand shock to it, I thought, dang, that's wouldn't be very fun to shoot very often. It just depends on how bad you want to go traditional archery. Whereas if you picked up the recurve and shot it, it's just a lot smoother shooting bow and more pleasant to shoot. So once you decide what type of limb design you're going for, recurve longbow, the other thing to take in consideration is the draw weight of the bow. Most bows, as far as traditional goes, it's measured at the draw length of 28 inches. So if you're ordering a bow, or if you're buying a bow and you see one that says 50 pounds at 28 inches, so whenever you're pulling back and you reach 28 inches draw length, you're holding back 50 pounds. That's what it means right there. If you look at the draw weight of the hunting bow prior to 1970, the average weight was around 45 pounds. Now if you jump ahead into the 1980s and you look at the average draw weight in the early 1980s, was a lot heavier. I'm talking like 65 to 70 pound draw weight. So you're wondering why such a difference? Well, in the early 70s is when technology of the compounds started to evolve. But the early compounds weren't as efficient as what the new compounds are today. So you usually had the technology of the bow designs and the wheels. They just didn't shoot a very fast arrow. And since you were using sights, a lot of that shooting ability was in your range estimation. So if you're shooting a flatter shooting arrow, you're taking out a lot of the air with range estimation. So what they did to make up the difference, the lack of the speed that they can get out of the compound, what they did, they cranked them up. They cranked them up to around 70 pounds on average, and that made for a faster shooting arrow, and that, like I said, it made for a little easier, more accurate bow, because as far as sights go. So now, by the time you get to the mid-70s, like I said, the average bow is 65, 70 pounds. Now all of a sudden you got guys that are trying to going back into the traditional archery. And that's kind of how my history with archery was. I started out with a compound in that time era, and when I got ready to pick up traditional archery, I had the mindset that I needed a 70-pound bow. Traditional archery was not very popular in the 80s, I'll tell you that much right now. A lot of my peers made fun of me for even attempting to shoot with a recurve. So I just flat out ignore all their, remarks, oh, why do you want to shoot that slow stuff? They just couldn't understand it. To them, traditional archer, the arrow just flew so slow. Really, it doesn't shoot that. It's just the idea, it's a mindset to it. So me trying to get started into traditional archery, first thing I did, I bought a recurve that was 70 pounds. Now, I found a recurve. It was actually a Martin Mamba, and I bought it in, it was right around the mid-80s to right, I would say, yeah, I'd say about mid-80s is when I bought it. I bought it that summer, and I was practicing with it, and right before bow season I was practicing with it, and I decided to take a break, and I left it strung, and I put it in the truck, and I came back a couple hours later, and the heat inside the truck cab actually busted the limbs. Lesson learned right there. I didn't know. A compound, I get done shooting my compound, I hang it up in the gun rack of my truck, and I'm good to go the next day. Well, I did the same thing to my recurve and learned a lesson. Can't do that. So here it is, right before archery season, and I'm looking for another recurve. So I go to the local archery shop, and I said, look, I have this Martin bow, and I want another Martin bow, and how fast can I get one? So I don't know. I called the company. So he called up the Martin Bow Company. No recurves in stock. It just nobody was buying recurves. I think I bought that recurve was custom made for $90. That's how much I paid. Now the same bow is a lot more expensive nowadays. So make a long story short, they custom made me a recurve. Being a compound shooter, I told the guy at Martin Archery that I wanted a recurve made between 65 to 70 pounds at 30 inches. And that's what they made me. And you can see it. It's probably the only bow that I know that's probably got this writing on it, because almost every other bow that I know is measured out in 28 inches. This bow says it's 66 pounds at 30 inches. Now, you take this longbow right here, it's a Howard Custom, and it measures 70 pounds at 28 inches. Almost every bow, unless it's special made by some bower, but they all mark the weight at 28 inches. So you're asking really what the draw weight really has to do with a hunting bow. This longbow that I bought at 70 pounds, I shot for, well, I hunted with it for several years, and 1 year in particular, I was shooting this bow for, like I said, I'd shot it for a couple of years and harvested several deer with it, and I decided I'm going to get the recurve out. I hadn't shot it in a while, and I'm going to see how I do with the recurve. Well, with that longbow pulling 70 pounds, my pattern, I could hit a pie plate at 20 yards 10 out of 10 times, but my arrow group was like this, about the size of the pie plate actually. When I shot the recurve, which is about 10 pounds lighter, my grouping, my arrow went like that, almost touching each other. That's how much difference 10 pounds would make. If it's something that you're going to be shooting for a long, long time, you might be young and stout now, but when you get to be maybe older or retired, are you still going to be archery hunting? Maybe. Are you still going to be able to pull that 70-pound bow back? I doubt it. So for a beginner, I recommend a recurve right around 50 pounds. That'll get you plenty enough bow to get you shooting white-tailed deer.